Hello and welcome to Talking About My Generation. I'm Herbert Ricardo here with Alicia Vassar and Rich Grego. And today we're going to talk about a parable, The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas. And it was written by Ursula K. Le Guin. And I'm going to let Alicia talk a little bit about what the parable really represents, and then we'll talk about it.
Okay, so the ones who walk away from Omelas is kind of about a utopia. Um, Ursula goes through whatever your utopia you believe. She kind of pushes it out there of just you can use your imagination for it. But that utopia is at the expense of the happiness, or that happiness is at the expense of a single horrific cost, the endless abysmal suffering of one child. So this world would cease being happy and a utopia if that child was not treated in this manner. And the ones who walk away from Omelas, some people have different reactions when they're introduced to this idea that their happiness is predicated on this child's suffering. And most people just kind of go through the emotions and then they just continue on. But there's the ones who walk away from Omelas. They just keep going and they leave Omelas, and that's pretty much what the story is.
Oh, very good. Rich, what do you say?
Summation.
What are your thoughts?
Yeah, great summation. I get, and I suppose the overarching theme, right? The moral of the story is that, um, what if a paradise is achieved at the expense of one person's even one person's suffering? I mean, it doesn't have to just be that way. And again, we draw a lot of parallels. Is it worth the cost? Is it worth the cost of one person's suffering or a few people's suffering or whatever so that more people can be happy? It's almost like I guess my opening sort of reflection, just being the philosopher. If there was a philosophy class and I was doing an ethics thing as that ethics lesson, the contrast there, that would be the ultimate. If we remember utilitarianism, which is the greatest, the right thing to do is what makes most people involved and what most people affected by your decision happiest, right? And the people who if it's a minority that aren't happy, well, so much the worse for them. You do the right thing when you make the most people possible happy. So Omelas would be the ultimate utilitarian nightmare, I guess, right? And lo and behold, as Alicia pointed out, look at the world we live in. If you want to talk about utilitarian nightmares, right? So that's my
Yeah, I that struck me too rereading it is, and I'm pretty sure that's what a good story is you're able to kind of connect it to whatever time, because I believe this was released in the 70s, so this has been out for a while.
Mhm.
Um, but the idea that it's laid bare that utopia is predicated on that child, and even if it's a false idea, because that's another kind of area that goes along with the story, because the way that Ursula describes, I don't know how to express it. uh I'll get back to it.
Yeah, yeah. And so, in reading this and recognizing the parable itself in today's environment, and especially teaching organizational ethics, what we do is we can look at the world and we can look at the working world, right? And we can see, this life that we've decided to make for ourselves. We're seeking happiness. We want to live in a world where we have an environment that is easy to live in, that we're finding happiness among each other. We work in an environment where we enjoy working with people that we are. But deep down, there are individuals who are not enjoying life quite as much. So if you look at society as a whole, you've got people who are wealthy and can afford a wonderful life. But of course, they're able to afford that wonderful life at the expense of people who have to, let's say, clean their homes, wash their cars, pick the fruits and the vegetables that they're able to eat, and what kind of lives do those people have, right? And so a lot of the idea behind this, and in Ursula's the ones who walk away from Omelas, it's a society, right? It's a city that everybody is having fun and enjoying themselves and everything else, and there's one child who must suffer and who's beaten and who lives in filth, a child, just someone who you need to nurture, whatever. But the only way everyone else can have a happy life is if that child is constantly in misery. And the question is in society, how many people are willing to allow themselves to be free of recognizing that there are people who live in poverty or a miserable life, and they can turn an eye to that and say, well, that's just the way life is. You know, we have to live in a world where some people have to suffer in order for me to have a good life. And of course, in the business environment, we'll look at companies that exploit workers in developing nations, right, such as India, and making the clothes and making the glasses or the cell phones that work in kind of miserable environments. But what do we get? We get wonderful phones, we get nice clothes and everything else. And because that's so far away, there's a part of our psyche that turns away from, because we don't want to spend our time thinking about those individuals, because if we do, it takes away from our happiness, right?
I I agree, but I think one of the things that Le Guin's story shows, and it goes back to what I was saying, um, that happiness didn't have to be predicated on the child. I think throughout the story, she talks about, is it more believable now that you see the suffering of this child? Like we correlate happiness with having to have this evil, and um it makes me think about the fact that a lot of times we don't think of another way to do things. Like we're talking about the way this system is currently working, the exploitation in garment factories and a lot of the items that we make. Why is the happiness or whatever benefit we get, which is the phone, the clothing, why does that have to be at the expense of other people? I think that's kind of what Le Guin's story is kind of showing.
Yeah, and that incidentally, I mean, is one of Herb's persistent themes. I mean, you always hear when we've talked about, in public discourse a lot now about inflation, and why isn't the government doing something about inflation, right? That's a big deal. And what should they do about it? And how should we manipulate what should the government do to manipulate the system and do all kinds of Keynesian financial arrangements and rearrangements to make things more affordable for people because they're really suffering so that big corporations can profit. And what I never hear anybody bring into this discourse, but Herb has, incidentally, is why aren't we looking at corporations? Why is nobody saying why isn't the government doing anything about this? Why is nobody going right to the source and saying, why aren't the corporations doing anything about it? Because they're the ones, as you say, Alisha, they're the ones with the power to ease the suffering immediately, right? All they got to do is drop prices. Right? Simple as that. And again, I suppose their counter argument would be, well, it's not that simple because then we'd lose money and we'd pass the cost on to the consumer, and the cheeseburger would be $30, and your car would be $100,000. We could never afford it. And I'll let him pick up on this, but I think Herb would say that's BS. Yes, they can. They're sitting on mountains of money. And they cry poverty because it's convenient for them. And my as a philosopher, I'll just close with this. My as a philosopher um, reflection on all of that is why is that not to some extent the ethic that we've bought into through capitalism or our version of capitalism, right? That we just accept that some people are going to suffer so that other people, is it not built on exploitation? You see a need out there, maybe it's a desperate need, and you exploit it for your benefit, not for the other person's benefit. There's a famous quote, right? And Adam Smith, who's the philosopher economist, who's the father of capitalism, he said, it's not for the good of society that the butcher and the baker and the candlestick maker go to work, get up and go to work every morning. It's for their own self-interest. And that the counter argument would be that's the basis of capitalism, and it's worked very well for us up to this point. But I said all that to set up the discussion so Herb could knock that down with his incisive logic.
Well, I can't really knock that down in that one sense. You started off in the right track, and of course,
Right.
Alicia alluded to it as well.
Yeah.
And that is that we seem to always want to relegate things to black and white. We want to believe that it's either this way or that way. And and when we even read about theories in the
Yeah.
work environment or in business, it's either one or the other. And the reality behind life is it doesn't, that's not where life lives. Life lives in the gray, in the middle. And making your point, Rich, is that you've got the stock market today, is as high as it's ever been, and yet 80% of the population is recognizing that prices are just astronomically high. People aren't going to restaurants. The cost of food is high. There are so many of these costs that are high. Well, the costs that are high is because the companies are making the money because they've charged so much. Does that really need to happen? Can companies operate with less money? And the answer is yes. They'll still make a profit. They'll still make a lot of profit, but money can come down. But again, back to what Richard mentioned is that if you do talk sometimes to individuals who are running companies, they say no, the system is designed that this is what we have to do because if I start to bring my prices down, uh, other people are not going to, or other companies aren't going to do that. And so then I'm at fault. Now, could we create a society, back to what you were saying, Alicia? Can we create a society that it doesn't have to be this way? That would be up to the government to say everybody, all corporations that make more than $1 billion or whatever need to reduce by 25% and give a 25% discount on your products to, well, that's not going to happen in today's world. So how do we do that? And again, the idea lends itself to we're going to live in a world where we're going to have to struggle. And then the question is how long do we struggle until the system breaks? And obviously, it's left up to governments to make that, in a way, to make that adjustment. But as Rich says, because I've mentioned this, why should we wait for the government to make the adjustment? Corporations know what they need to do collectively, and they could come together and make that decision. They're just choosing not to.
They do know, you think? You think they're consciously making the choice, or do you think they're so caught up in the neo liberalism and capitalism that they're saying,
Well,
listen, we can't do that. It's sink or swim in this business. You got to be a shark, and the minute you show weakness or start backpedaling, you won't survive. Your competitors will eat you alive. Is
right.
that
So corporations can collude to increase prices. They clearly can collude to reduce prices. Okay, and
yeah?
that's the true answer to that. Again, until part of society, part of humanity, until you're forced to do something, you won't do it, right? If your
Mhm.
self-interest is to gain the most that you can, gain the most power, gain the most money, gain the most control, then logic, reason, whatever you want to use to the human psyche would be you're going to continue to behave that way until there's a force that's making you behave otherwise.
Yeah. Interesting. I don't know. What do you think, Alicia? I always, when I introduce topics like this and I talk about business, I say, well, how about the company that, if they lay off a quarter of their employees, right, kick them to the curb, everybody else will make more money. um, I guess the libertarian in me says, well, isn't that what they're supposed to do, right? I mean, I don't know. I mean, isn't and if they don't do that, if they don't have that kind of attitude, their profits will decrease, correct?
So, so think about it this way. What we're doing is our minds are locked in to 100 years ago. And I'll explain this because what happens is you have companies that have to make a profit, they have to make money, and they have to pay their shareholders. And technology comes in, new technology comes in, people are laid off. And over time, so whether it's the newspaper, the radio, the television, the computer, and because of technology, people lose certain jobs. And then people say, well, you know what, technology is always going to be there. And then people will readjust, and then there'll be other jobs. And I kind of agree with this to some degree, but the problem is the level of technology and what it can do. It can truly put people out of work, tens of thousands to close to hundreds of thousands of people out of work. Then that becomes way more significant than just particular little industries. It becomes a whole entire society.
Mhm.
And what goes along with that is that when you have then all these people who are not working, then that affects your sense of community. And I'm not talking about just a community of a town or a village or a city. I'm talking about a whole entire country, right?
Yeah.
And so then what do you do? What do you do as a society? What do you do as a government? So I think what really needs to happen, we are advanced today. We are way more advanced than we were 100 years ago. We're more advanced than we were 50 years ago. Can we create a system? Can we figure out a system where we can put everybody to work? Can we create a system where even if somebody is not productive in their work today, can we train them well enough that they will be productive tomorrow? Or do we just say, no, all we care about is the bottom line today, and we will deal with that particular problem tomorrow? And I think that short-sightedness is a problem with how our society behaves. We need to be thinking about more long term. That's where a society gets better when they think about what are the repercussions of the decisions that we make today on tomorrow. Families have to think this way, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Schools have to work this way. Churches have to think this way. Well, corporations and institutions and clearly government environments have to think this way about society. And I think what happens is kind of going back to this parable, is that we're just accepting that there's a divide, and even the divide as it's getting bigger and bigger, we're accepting that that's just the way life is going to be, and it doesn't have to be that way. Going
Yeah.
back to you, Alicia, what you're saying, do we truly have to live this way,
Mhm.
where people have to suffer? No, they don't. Sure, not everybody's going to have exactly what everybody else has. And certainly there are going to be some people who are going to be more content and happier with what they have. But the level of poverty and the level of not having doesn't have to be where it is.
Makes
I
sense.
think it really brings up or it reminds me of the story, the Omelas story, because the way that instead of the people who walk away from Omelas, they walk away. They walk away from this system. Like when I understand the concepts of if one thing happens, there may be another reaction in another area. But there's so many maybe it's more of being introduced to there's so many other ways of existing, of humans doing things, not to mention thinking about how creative we were just from the jump. Like I was casually talking with my brother, we were trying to move something and we were like, he calls it walking, where you basically go back and forth and jiggle it. I was telling him like, this is how ancient people did construction. And I thought it was really funny because I'm like, look at me thinking like ancient people. Um, but going back to us as humans is we are creative and amazing. And I think I really do identify a lot with those people walking away from Omelas, because this idea that I have to cause suffering to be happy, like Le Guin says, it's a false idea.
Yeah.
And even if it's idealistic, because I know a lot of younger people can come off as idealistic, I would rather be idealistic in that than to, I guess, just accept that I have to hurt people in the way, especially the the ways described in like it's a very viscerally descriptive short story,
Mhm.
and the description of the child is so good. It hits on so many different levels of physical abuse, but also emotional abuse, isolation, all of these things that are dehumanizing.
Yeah.
um yeah, but I think I would like to know, do you think it's a little too idealistic?
Well, again, well, it's not to me. It's not idealistic at
Mhm.
all. I mean, it's actually horrific. The fact that
No,
even if
she means her, she means, you mean your attitude toward it, right, Alicia?
um just the idea that we don't have to cause suffering like that,
Yeah.
just in its sense, because some people do believe that there has to be an equal and opposite reaction.
Mhm.
um and I don't know if it comes off as idealistic. I feel like a lot of people who like being people should like that.
Mhm. I'm
you
sorry, I
know,
didn't mean to interrupt.
well, no. Well, also, again, part of the parable of the story is in the title, the ones who walk away from Omelas. So this is really interesting. These are people who they see that we live in a city where we can have all the fun and greatness and enjoyment or whatever. And there's this child who is suffering in just really terrible conditions. And what they do is these individuals walk away from that. And 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 it's not like they're even changing it. They
Good
just can't
point.
take it. They
Yeah.
can't take it and they're walking away. Well, what does that say
Good point.
about who we are as a
Yeah.
society and as a human? The fact that you're walking away from that child, um, even if it causes, and again, when I'm looking at this, I'm thinking to myself, even if it causes me pain to try to change everybody else, I would rather do that, because walking away, that would stay in my consciousness for my whole entire life. The fact that I walked
Mhm.
away not from the happiness, that I walked away from that child, that I
Yeah.
walked away without trying to do something. And and I think what's more powerful than anything else is that as a society, are we willing to turn our backs on so many people who are suffering, um, just because we have a belief, or we live in a society that believes that in order to have, there have to be a group of people that have not.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think that walking away symbol in the story, I've heard critics of I haven't read a lot of them, but I've heard critics of, because that story has been analyzed, a million times over. Um, and some of the critics have, not critics of the story, but analyzers of the interpreters of the story have said, that's an interesting metaphor, the walking away, an interesting symbol, the walking away. It's not the people in Omelas that decided to stay and start a revolution. They walked away. And it brought to mind when read that. I don't remember when I read that a long time ago. I thought about people like Henry David Thoreau, remember, went off and lived in the cabin in the woods, and Gandhi even, who rejected modernity, and really monks, I guess, I suppose, who go, they realize they live in an evil world, and their response is to, well, we're not going to participate in it anymore. And in a sense, I guess all those things are kind of rebellion themselves. Walking, I mean, put it this way, if everybody, the symbol of walking away, if everybody in our system, and you've heard people say this, I think, you guys tell me, what, a few months ago, wasn't there a national, and I don't know who organized this, don't buy anything day? I don't know what they called it. You remember
Yes.
this?
Yeah.
For one
Hmm.
day, he said, because the people wanted to show how the corporations, how powerful you could be by just not participating anymore. And I think, in a sense, that's a walking away kind of an attitude, right? When we
Hmm.
decide, and if everybody did that, just said, okay, I may be powerless as an individual to do anything about this myself, because the people in power have the power, and they, what do you,
Hmm.
what, they don't want to listen to people who don't have power. But what you can do is just not participate anymore. That's the walking away, I suppose, right? And if
Well,
everybody did that in this system that we have, imagine we have this consumer economy that if all of a sudden everybody became Zen Buddhist monks, I assume would crash, right? So
That would be insane.
yeah, I mean, right? I mean, it would crash this economy, and we'd have to do things differently. So, in some sense, I mean, I guess aren't people who say I'm not going to participate in this anymore, like the CEO who can't stand the rat race anymore, who finally decides to, live on a organic farm, right, and raise his own food, and run a daycare or something like that. Is that not maybe analogous? You tell me. I don't know, Herb.
I think it is, but it really strikes me what Dr. Ricardo said, because I didn't even think about it from that perspective.
Yeah.
But it does kind of show a level of selfishness that, yeah, you have the privilege to walk away from Omelas.
Mm,
The
yeah.
child doesn't have that privilege.
Yeah.
um and I think that's why I'm very much rooted myself in the idea of people themselves being able to have access to power and take making decisions. Like, I'm getting more into local government and things and how those work much closer to people, um or just completely disengaging from these systems in general, and looking at different forms of organization that don't follow these traditional forms of organization. Because I think you have that kind of conundrum where you can say you're walking away from Omelas, you're no longer participating in it, but in a way, you sort of are.
Mm,
yeah, by walking away, you're allowing it to continue.
mm,
And I would say that that's probably a little bit different, Rich, from your perspective, in the sense of, I think if in a country or if in a society we didn't buy, then we would be acknowledging how bad something is, right? By not purchasing the goods or whatever. And so, in a way, it sounds like you're walking away by not buying, but I think what you're doing is the companies still have to make money. So they're saying, okay, 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 if you're not going to buy, then we will bring our numbers down, or our prices down.
mm,
So in that sense, because people walking away won't change the child,
mm.
by not buying, you will change
Yeah.
how the corporations behave.
Yeah.
Um, again, it's a really interesting situation, and with Alicia talking about interested in getting into local government and politics. I think this is a great thing to do. I think not walking away, not saying our system is bad, it's always been bad, it'll always be bad, and then walking away and not participating in voting or anything else like that. I think that's a true walking away, and I don't think that that's good, right? We want to create a better environment for people. So what we want to do is we want to encourage them to vote. We want to let them know, yes, it's going to be messy, yes, it's going to be hard, but by doing things, um, you know, we have to be somewhat optimistic in life, period. And again, I've known so many people who have not had, so many people who have had difficult lives and just situations that a lot of us would never want to be in, but are still optimistic because they've seen how bad it is and believe that it doesn't have to be that way, right? So the question is are we so comfortable that we don't feel that? And what we almost want is to almost stay in that comfort zone. Is that where we want to be? Do we want to just stay, um, hey, that's just the way life is. There's going to be good, there's going to be bad. As long as it's not too bad, then we're going to be okay. And don't knock it. And and I think that you know what is part of living? Is it to make yourself feel better? I'm sure it is. Is it for you to make others feel better? Is it to make a collective environment? And I would have to say, um, there are people who say, you know what? I don't think I can help anybody else. All I can do is help myself. And you can't fault someone for that. But then where do we live if everybody was to think that way? Right?
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
got to be there's got to be somebody who or people enough who are outside of themselves that truly believe that we have to do things better for not only for ourselves but for other people too.
Yeah, that makes sense. But and again, I don't want to interrupt if you were going to say something, Alicia. But
It reminds me a lot of I think there's a lot more people that are focusing on the idea of community because you cannot save the entire world. I've been told that by my grandparents a million and one times, but you can help your neighbor. You can help someone in your neighborhood, or it doesn't have to be ginormous. Community building, because I'm learning more about community building and how I want to, because some of the most amazing people that I've read, authors, writers, um, they talk about the community around them. I think about James Baldwin, like all of the stories I've heard of him, he never drove. So a lot of people would have to drive him. But I think he hung out with Nina Simone. He hung out with a bunch of different Black artists, uh, French philosophers. I don't know if he got as far as Sartre.
sorry. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, Sartre.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but he hung out with philosophers, all of these things,
Mm.
and it it did seem to make a much richer life. It seemed, and I feel like if we take kind of that idea of we don't have to save the world, we can just start where we are
Mm.
and making connections and helping who we can. And it doesn't have to be overextending yourself, because part of having a community is the fact that they're able to help you. One of the greatest things about, like I said, me and David both have families that are very close and tight knit, is all of our expertise are now kind of knitting together.
Mm.
My father will talk with his father, helps him out with car stuff because he's a super into like car person. Um, Cooking goes back and forth between our families because each of our family members like cooking a different amount and stuff. Um, Growing that community kind of helps with having a more fulfilling life on its own, but also easier in a lot of ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure Herb, that's integral to Herb's philosophy, I would say. I'm pretty familiar with it now. It's social capital, I guess, right? What they call social capital. It's what it's all. There are two things I wanted to, just quick points I wanted to raise to kind of ground this more even more deeply and sort of more practically in our environment. One is, would you say that this divide that we're talking about The sort of well, Omelas, because we're all self-interested and life is built on exploitation. It's inevitable, and the best you can do is look out for yourself on one hand, and on the other hand, more what you and Herb have been saying, right? We are intricately connected to other people, and we all benefit when we recognize our commonalities and the holism of life rather than the separation between people. Would you not say that this is one of the primary unspoken but important issues at stake in the current political climate, in the current political debate? For instance, we just had a very interestingly extremely controversial figure elected in New York as mayor. I think because that word socialism is such a electric third rail for anybody in our society. We've been so conditioned to react violently and adversely to that when a guy openly calls himself a democratic socialist, everybody freaks out. But there's a guy, it seems to me, disagree or agree with his policies, whose primary ethic, what he wants to build his policies on, is you and Herb's notion that that's what a society is all about, that it's recognizing commonalities and our interconnectedness, and the fact that one person falling and another person rising are not inversely proportional. In other words, we rise or fall together, as opposed to one person needing to exploit other people in that, right? That seems to me his ethic. Whereas on the other side, and I won't name names, on the other side of the Mandami kind of political spectrum, you have people who really have bought into this ethic, right? That this is what's made our economy great, is competition and individualism and everybody looking out for themselves, and every man for himself and the devil take the hindmost. That's what's made us a strong society of rugged individualists and innovators and stuff like that. So, no handouts for the weak and the poor and the destitute. It'll just take the resources from the productive people and give it to the bad people, right? Or to give it to the people who can't produce and drag us all down. Am I wrong in thinking that that's largely the ethic that we're talking about, that underlies these two political
Yeah, I
views?
think it has a very utilitarian slant, like you were talking about earlier on. Like
Mhm.
it has to, and I think that's one of the things that I really like about the Omelas story is
Yeah,
that Le Guin tries to get you to buy into it.
yeah, mhm.
Like, does it make more sense that this happy society now exists at the cost of this?
Yeah.
And maybe it's kind of like a political compass kind of test to see where you fall,
Mm.
or how you think about things that might kind of
Yeah.
lead people to favor one policy over the other.
I know Herb's got to have opinions on this. I mean, I would assume you agree with me, Herb, but maybe I'm wrong.
Um, no, I do. I
Yeah.
do. The thought that I have is, if you want to speak specifically as an American,
Yeah.
is that we have been conditioned for, the better part of a couple hundred years to believe that self-sufficiency, individualism is a good thing.
Yeah.
So even when you have someone who represents the masses and says, by following this socialistic way of living, everyone will have a better life, right? I'm not so sure, even though some people, it sounds good, there's a characteristic within an individual or individuals that believe, if that happens, my life will not be as good. In other words, that system can't create it so that my life is going to be staying where it is or getting better. If by everybody being the same, somehow it's interpreted that that my situation becomes lower.
Yeah.
So I think one of the reasons why socialism, even as a term, forget it as an ideology and even trying to put it into practice, it is rarely given a lot of value in our country, is just because of the psyche of what we've put into our minds, that we can't even understand that any form of socialism could make our lives better.
Even though it does all the time. Actually, right, our whole capitalist system is based on socialist institutions and goods and services and public works and everything, right?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
but it's not delivered that way though.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. We don't
Right?
understand. Yeah. Yeah.
So if
Yeah.
we take the military,
Yeah.
um, you know, 70 years ago, the military wasn't such a great place to be because all it really did was feed soldiers, house soldiers, and they all had to fight. Life wasn't really that great. The military over the last 30, 40 years recognized that we have to create a better environment if we want to recruit, because we don't have the draft anymore. So we have to recruit. So we're going to make it better. And what we've done is we've taken care of our employees, which are soldiers and military personnel, and we've given them training and better working environments and
The
all these
healthcare.
and healthcare
Yeah.
and everything else. And then even once they leave, we still continue to give them
Yeah.
and thank
Yeah.
them for the work, even if they've not gone into battle or anything
Yeah.
else like that.
Yeah.
And so and that's socialism. That's a form of socialism, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so, I've often said that the U.S. military is the largest socialistic country in the world. Again, maybe people disagree with me, but again, I think they treat people much better than a lot of corporations and companies do, where
Yeah.
they're not required to train, they're not required to give time off, they're not required to give benefits. They only do it as a competitive um, uh,
Yeah.
advantage, and then of course another
Yeah.
company will do the same thing too.
Yeah.
But I think the average individual doesn't look at it, Rich, from your perspective,
Yeah.
in that sense. And
Yeah.
that's right. I think all the other establishments that we've created is
Yeah.
to try to give people a better life.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, the average person doesn't seem to realize who rails against the evils of socialism. I'm sure 90% of them would not be functional in society if they hadn't been through our public education system, which is a completely socialist institution. I don't think China does it any. I mean, ultimately, right? They requisition money from the general population and redistribute it in a government project. And the checks that all the employees get have the government or the municipal or county, whatever entity on them. It's a completely socialist institution. The roads and bridges, right? I mean, the government builds those, the regulatory agencies, Food and Drug Administration. I mean, our society, literally, a capitalist society, could not function if they didn't have roads and bridges and all the government services that are regulating what they do. So I mean, I don't know, maybe maybe we're getting too much of a sidetrack away from Omelas when we talk about it, but it just seems to me the mentalities underlying those political systems have a lot to do with the theme of Omelas, right? Because what? Yeah.
If you want to bring this bird down for a landing into how this affects us as um, individuals, as friends and family,
Yeah.
um, this kind of capitalistic and also this system by some people have to suffer while others do better. Think of families, and not all families welcome um, individuals from their families who are not doing well, because what will happen is if they bring in family members who are not doing well, then it reduces the standard of living that person has, right? So in reality, even we as family are living the Amelas a parable because in order for us to live a better life, making enough money for ourselves, if we take care of somebody else, it reduces our quality of life, right?
Sure.
Um, and so what do? We try to figure out how to not walk away from family, right? But maybe we can help them a little bit here and there, but we're not changing who we are, just like the happy people in the city are not changing who they are for the child. I see this in the human condition.
Yeah. And I suppose you could also argue, Alicia, your comment about Sartre, about James Baldwin and being friends with all these French existentialists. Sartre's one of his famous comments is hell is other people. And by that, it was in one of his plays. And by that, he meant that you can't, human relationships and even, look at nature is based on um, exploitation of others, and even the and they're suffering at the core cost of our benefit, and that does happen. And I mean, he says it's inevitable. You walk down the street, we build a house, we're genociding out of existence millions and millions of insects, making the land uninhabitable for hundreds of animal species, maybe wiping them out because we do it so much, right? But we think that's perfectly acceptable, right? I mean, there's a reason why, Jain and the Jain religion, Jain monks literally sweep the ground in front of them as they walk. I mean, it's kind of symbolic, and they strain the water that they drink because they don't want to make anything that they do be at the cost of any other being in the universe. And they need to do that because that does seem to be the inevitable sort of condition, perhaps, of the inevitable aspect, not just of the human condition, maybe of just life itself. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I think Le Guin is kind of showing us that it doesn't have to be like that. That because, like I said, it's clear that there's this false idea that the happiness, the goodness has to come at the expense of something else.
Yeah.
And like using the example with housing and stuff,
Yeah.
I'm really interested in the way, like learning the history of housing, seeing the differences. When I went to New York, one of the most
Mhm.
interesting thing was seeing more compact row houses and things.
Mhm.
I think they're one of the more efficient ways. Like I'm
Mhm.
part of me wants to study urban planning because it's such an interesting thing. There's so many different aspects of it that go into it.
Yeah.
We can take these things into account. It may take more time, it may take something more. And I know under a capitalist system, those things aren't prioritized. Um, but I think the idea that we have to live at the expense of decimating land for people, um, I just I like the idea that Le Guin leaves us with, that we don't have to, that happiness does not have to come at the cost.
Glad there are people like you in the world.
Yeah. So, again, I think what we've done is we've recognized that, and this is one of the things that I so much love about our conversations, that we've recognized that there are um, there are feelings, there are um, injustices that we live with, right? And when we read and reflect on some of these writers, philosophers, even business, in my discipline, we recognize that it's not perfect. It's not perfect by a long shot, and sometimes we feel like it's just moving so far away from us. But the more we read, the more we understand, the more we reflect, the more we, look at how this can, affect our lives, maybe in a positive way. I think that's why this is so good for us, and we like to encourage others to, on their own, find, that sense of peace. And I'll even go one step further, because I know Rich and I have talked about this. And for me, even sometimes, even the fight and the discomfort is a sense of peace for me, because at least I feel like I'm trying to change. Whereas uh, I have a hard time thinking that there's nothing I can do. And I think each one of us feel that. And hopefully the more people out there that aspire to recognizing, let's make a better life for ourselves and for others, then there's always hope.
Well said.
Yeah. Uh,
Completely agree.
Okay, well, great. Well, thank you. And again, thanks for this wonderful time. As always, it's such a great time to be able to sit with you all and reflect. The Florida sun is killing me over here. It is. It's raising havoc with me.
Yeah.
But anyway, have a great rest of your day, week and weekend. And I know we'll catch up in the next episode. So everybody, keep it between the lines. Rich, thanks so much. Alicia, thank you. And press that subscribe button, and we'll see you all next time. Ciao. Thanks for hanging out with us today. We look forward to next week as we cover another cool and fun topic. This podcast was produced by Three Lions Production and sponsored by Consulting and Training. Until next time, keep it between the lines.